From the Sky News Centre, this is Paul Murray Live.
Thank you very much for watching. Count the exclusives in Sharry's show. Make sure you hear from Chris Kenny all the way through to Rita Panahi each and every night. You thought last night was big. It is massive tonight on Paul Murray Live. We'll have a chat to Megyn Kelly from the United States. She's fired up and also pretty funny tonight. We'll have some fun with her. Round two in the debate which, took over last week between Stephen Conroy and Bronwyn Bishop. It'll continue here. And right now it's just gone 7:30 in Alice Springs, where about 90 minutes ago a curfew came into effect. We'll cross to Matt Cunningham, who is live on the streets in literally a couple of minutes' time. But first, well, the signs of aggro and stress that were there at the end of last year are back for the Prime Minister and were there for all to see. As you know, when it comes to the headlines this week, before we even get to clueless Clare, and I've got plenty to say about her today and the idiot immigration minister, you know that according to Newspoll, they're headed towards a minority government. According to the Roy Morgan poll, it's currently 50-50, and even in the Sydney Morning Herald and The Age, the personal ratings for the Prime Minister are starting to take a dive. In fact, when you have a look here, you can see that 49% of voters, when asked to have a look at the Prime Minister's performance over the past few weeks, well, 49% say poor or very poor. On the far right of the screen, you'll see those little squiggle marks. The two at the top are people who've said good or very good. That's going down. The people who are saying poor or very poor has been going up and going up for some time. Now, in part, something that absolutely exemplifies how cranky this Prime Minister is right now and how out of touch he is right now is the situation that has been building for some time but hit a crescendo in the past couple of days, and that is the issues in and around Alice Springs. Now, Sky News Primetime has been relentless in having a look at this story because it's the citizens, no matter of what background they have, but it's the citizens of Alice Springs that are living in fear. There is many deep social problems that need to be dealt with. But before you can even start to get into the root cause, you've got to deal with the consequences. And the consequences, of course, is youth crime. This was $30,000 worth of damage being done to a local tavern in the afternoon. Now, the two peaks of violence happen in the late afternoon and the beginnings of dusk. That is not affected by the curfew that was announced today. But again, back at 3 a.m, that, of course, will be affected. Now, the Prime Minister, we know, has no interest in what is happening in Alice Springs, which is why the alternative Prime Minister, Peter Dutton, had this question for him today.
Since being elected, the Prime Minister has spent just 4 hours in Alice Springs. At the moment, local residents, business owners, school principals and the Mayor have all been pleading for support from you, Prime Minister. Yet locals have seen little evidence of the $250 million package that you promised making any difference to improve community safety. In fact, the situation has got much worse. Children are committing serious crimes. Sexual abuse is at a record high. Juvenile crime and domestic crime and abuse is at a record high. When does the Prime Minister intend to visit Alice Springs?
Order.
Now, due to the last major flare-up in Alice Springs, as a way of trying to quell things in the hope that it would distract people from the Prime Minister's real hope for Indigenous affairs, and that, of course, was The Voice, that we spent $450 million and an entire year debating. It started as 60-40 yes, 60-40 hell no, after the Prime Minister's version of events, of course, were completely unconnected to the reality of what was happening in Alice Springs. It was January of last year when the Prime Minister spent more time in the air to and from Alice Springs than he spent on the ground. The press conference was supposed to be outside, but because they thought that they would end up getting trouble from locals, it was taken inside. The meetings were invite only. It was all picture opportunities with no real action, because the real priority of the Prime Minister was literally, after flying out of Alice Springs, you know exactly where he headed. Well, he ended up turning right, going down to Melbourne and playing with the plush set for a few days in a row at the Australian Open. Ice cream after ice cream seemed to be the only thing that he was interested in down there, as opposed to the urgent issues that were taking place in Alice Springs. Websites like news.com.au even noticed that there was a problem here, where the Prime Minister was spending more time with his feet up, getting cheers from the crowd that, of course, 12 months later turned to boos. Because the honeymoon was still on back then. Well, it's way over now, and the reality of governing is that this bloke does not like being forced to do the things that he doesn't want to do. Now, remember, his plan was for the voice. Even the Northern Territory voted against the voice. For that, Peter Dutton will forever be shamed by the left and this Prime Minister, who was, of course, playing for that moment in history. But what about this? As the first sign of the Prime Minister being right back into the angry elbow, the lost elbow, the tired elbow, the confused elbow, the disconnected elbow from the end of last year, the one that supposedly had been reborn for some too little too late tax cuts that, yes, got them over the line in a by-election, but the national numbers have got worse as if none of those tax changes had taken place at all. He was able to manage the headlines, not the reality of the lived experience of people in the Australian economy. And the Prime Minister does not like being asked questions that expose not only his glass jaw, but his lack of judgment. This was his response to the question that you have just seen asked by Peter Dutton.
A bloke who barely leaves his office, doesn't get out and about,
The member for Latrobe.
Except for his Wednesday night appearance on Sky News.
Well, firstly, clearly not true. Peter Dutton gets around plenty, but it's not for me to defend him. But there is no regular Wednesday night appearance here on Sky News. Instead, the synopses were misfiring for the Prime Minister today. Now, he does weekly radio chats, including with my friend and colleague in Ray Hadley. He does pop up on Sky News, but there's no regular scheduled appearance here in Sky News primetime. Instead, the Prime Minister, you can see how easily triggered he is that he thinks issues like Alice Springs are ones that are made up by the people who hold him to account, and that, largely in the media, is us. It is this channel, it is these times of the night. The Prime Minister continuously tries to change the subject and tries to believe that he is fighting against a man in Peter Dutton who has no idea what's really going on in Australia. Well, of course, he was right on the Jobs Summit. He was right on The Voice. And I think, in terms of where the majority of Australians are, he is right on the concept of us wanting to move to nuclear power as a way of getting to zero emissions, as opposed to the millions of cables, windmills and solar farms, the solar farms of which, of course, largely made in China and made by slave labour. But the Prime Minister, desperate not to answer the question that he had been asked about a situation where his own citizens, it's an Indigenous Labor MP as well, the people who supposedly were the heart of the nation, but of course when the heart of the nation is bleeding, this Prime Minister, not interested. Instead, petty barbs like ones about Sky News, and then this rubbish as well.
As I said, I have been a regular visitor to the Northern Territory.
Order.
I will continue to be a regular visitor to the Northern Territory, just as I suspect this bloke will be a continual regular visitor to Gina Rinehart's parties.
Seriously? It's the Prime Minister who also goes to billionaires' parties. Remember the one where that weekend where he was Taylor Swift one night and Katy Perry and the billionaires the other night? Now, we all know where Peter Dutton is when it comes to Alice Springs. He wants the kids taken care of and he wants people safe as well. And you want to talk about priorities? The Indigenous Affairs Minister, Linda Burney, has virtually disappeared since the election. The expectation is that she will get reshuffled up to be potentially the next Governor-General because she's such a failure. As for Peter Dutton, as for the opposition, their Indigenous Affairs spokesperson actually lives in Alice Springs. That, of course, is Jacinta Nampijinpa-Price, who, quite rightly, was raging in Parliament today, action needed in Alice Springs. But we know, when it comes to the priorities, it's not about action in Alice Springs, it's about ice creams and the VIP section when it comes to this Prime Minister. Well, as I mentioned, today, the Chief Minister did something right in the Northern Territory. She announced a curfew for the next couple of weeks. It kicks in at 6 p.m. each and every night in Alice Springs.
The scenes that we saw last night and the scenes that we saw yesterday afternoon absolutely warrant us stepping up and stepping in around a curfew from 6 p.m. at night till 6 a.m. in the morning.
Now, a man who has been relentless his entire career because he loves the territory. He loves everyone in the territory, not about their politics or their race, but he loves the territory and he is willing to tell the uncomfortable stories is, of course, Matt Cunningham. He did it at the NT News. He does it every day here at Sky News, and he's on the ground right now as this curfew has now been brought into effect. Now, Matt, as you know, 2 parts of the day, the late afternoon, this curfew doesn't affect it, but it is the middle of the night problems they're trying to get on top of. We're only, less than 2 hours into it. What happened tonight?
Look, it's pretty quiet at the moment, Paul. I'm out the front of the Todd Tavern, which is where really the worst of that happened yesterday. It was at about 3:30 p.m. that we saw, really a mob of people come here to the Todd Tavern. They were throwing rocks at the windows. They were trying to kick in the windows. An interesting point that you make about the fact that these incidents yesterday happened before the time that this curfew is kicking in, and presumably they happened without a lot of alcohol involved. Monday and Tuesday are dry days when it comes to takeaway alcohol in Alice Springs. That was something that was implemented after the Prime Minister's visit in January last year. Well, this was happening at 3:30 in the afternoon while they were actually trying to break into the pub. So I don't think alcohol was a factor yesterday, but the Chief Minister announcing that this afternoon, 6 p.m, the curfew kicks in till 6 o'clock in the morning. It's something that some locals have been calling for many, many years. In fact, Robin Lambley, who's an independent MP down in Alice Springs, sent me an article a minute or two ago. She first argued for this curfew back in 2006. So it's going to be in place for 2 weeks, and we'll see whether it has an impact.
In terms of where the kids live, I've been to Alice plenty, but you know it like the back of your hand. People living a little further out, g'day to whoever's in the background, they live, 10, 15 minutes out. In terms of the kids and the problems they're trying to deal with here, are kids going to be kept away from that central business district area, or the curfew means they have to be inside a house, even in one of the slightly more remote communities?
Well, no, the curfew applies to the Alice Springs CBD. So the Chief Minister said today that, if there's a child unsupervised out in the CBD between 6 p.m. and 6 a.m, the police or another service provider will take them to a safe place. Now, presumably that either means back to their parents or their family, or it means, into the care of Territory families. There's going to be that zero tolerance for at least the next 2 weeks. It is one of the things that really strikes you when you hear in Alice Springs, Paul, and I've been here many, many times over the past few years, and there have been times where I've walked around the streets of Alice Springs at 11, 12 o'clock at night, 1 o'clock in the morning, and sometimes you can see dozens, maybe even more than 100 kids, some of them as young as 7, 8, 9 years old, wandering around unsupervised at that time of night. Now, many of them won't be doing anything wrong, but the concern is that, as they get older, they graduate into perhaps some more troubling behaviour. So we're going to see for the next 2 weeks, the government and the police are saying that those kids are going to be taken off the streets if they're out at that time of night, and we're going to see whether that's going to make any difference. All right, last one here. What's the expectation about tomorrow? Because as we were saying, the Todd Tavern behind you there, that was attacked before the curfew would have kicked in. Is extra police being sent in from Darwin? What are they doing about what happens tomorrow afternoon? Well, one thing they're doing is returning what are known as PALIs, Police Auxiliary Liquor Inspectors. They're basically police auxiliaries that stand on bottle shops whenever they're open in Alice Springs. The government's been criticised because in the past month or so, they've actually removed that permanent police presence from those bottle shops. There are about 30-odd of those police auxiliary liquor inspectors who were removed out of Alice Springs and brought to Darwin to be trained to be full-time constables. But locals on the ground say that had a devastating effect because those PALIs have proven to be incredibly effective when it comes to controlling alcohol-related harm. I was just here tonight at this bottle shop behind me at the Todd Tavern, and there were 2 PALIs here tonight. Paul, the government and the police commissioner say there'll be 58 extra police in total, so 33 of those PALIs plus another 25 officers. One thing a lot of people are asking, though, is where does that leave the rest of the territory? Because I know the focus has been here on Alice Springs, but I can tell you what, in Darwin we have seen huge increases in crime as well. It's also been seen in places like Katherine and Tennant Creek. Pretty much everyone in the territory now has either been a victim of crime or knows someone close to them who has been a victim of crime, and that includes me. I mean, just a few weeks ago I had kids 12, 13 years old trying to smash their way into my house with some golf clubs. So, you know, I think it's interesting that they've rejected this suggestion that perhaps the AFP could be sent in to help the Police Commissioner and the Chief Minister dismiss that out of hand today. But a lot of people on the ground saying that the police don't have the resources to deal with the problem at the moment.
Yeah. Look, I know you are the best in the business of this stuff, but I've got to say I know that as a bloke who loves the territory, you don't like talking about the trauma of it, but it's a necessary trauma to be discussed, mate. Keep up the great reporting. Obviously, we'll see you all through the day tomorrow, but thanks for jumping on there as soon as you turned up there tonight. Appreciate it, mate.
Thanks, mate.
Good man, Matt Cunningham there in the Northern Territory. Now, again, as I say, the issue is not just what's happening at 3 o'clock in the morning, that will presumably be handled tonight, but what happens in the afternoon, what's going to happen over the Easter long weekend. Now, literally, a police officer out the front of everything is probably the best way of dealing with things, but as Matt's just said, they have to come from somewhere else. Now, are they coming from Tennant Creek? Yes. Are they coming from Darwin? Yes. Anyone who's been to Darwin recently, you know how much I love it. I espouse tourism. I espouse moving there. It's a truly magical part of Australia. But you go into a convenience store there and literally you have to go and ask the person behind the counter to come and unlock to be able to get into the fridges, not even to buy alcohol. That's the reality of crime. And that is something that is happening in a place that supposedly everyone cares about. And we only react when it seems to be on fire. Well, what about we deal with the fire, then we deal with the causes of the fire, but we also make sure that this isn't just one of those things that happens for a few days. We keep it up for a few months and if need be a few years. And I don't care what Twitter thinks about it. Back to Canberra, though, worth talking about here. Now, I'm going to show you 41 seconds of tape that tells you everything that is wrong about the Albanese government, and particularly clueless Clare O'Neil. Now, you know the story by now, but of course, clueless Clare O'Neil was doing an interview on one of the breakfast shows this morning. Well, the way it works in Canberra is that if you do an interview in the Parliamentary Press Gallery, everyone who is not the person you are doing the interview with, well, they line up at the front door to try to repeat the experience in some ways so they don't have to show the footage from the TV network that they don't work for. But on the other side, it's their one moment to maybe ask the question that wasn't asked on TV or radio. Now, when governments are in trouble, what they do is they try to get a camera brought down to the ministerial offices so that if the interview happens, there's no other reporters other than the one person they wish to do an interview with. Now, this isn't about media management. This is a metaphor for the cluelessness of Clare O'Neil. 41 seconds of a deer in the headlights who doesn't even have the ability to stop for 30 seconds to answer questions that presumably she has answers to, but I think we both know she has no idea how to answer.
Do you expect legal challenges to come out of this legislation if it's passed? I'm so sorry, I've got to go to a meeting. This is major legislation. This is major legislation and you're not taking questions of it.
What's your response? What confidence do you have or what advice do you have that these laws won't get thrown out by the High Court too? Minister, why his family are desperate and what are your response to concerns about his welfare and treatment?
This is major legislation and you're not taking questions.
It is embarrassing, Minister.
Why are you avoiding questions on this, Minister?
Now, under the rules of the Parliament, cameras and reporters are not allowed into the vast amount of the building, so the politicians or the people they are meeting with freely are able to move around without it being reported. So that's why they stopped at the top of the stairs. But what a metaphor of a clueless minister. A minister who has no idea what she's doing. If she did, she'd be able to answer all of those questions. She'd be able to bat some of them away. But, sorry, I've got to go to a meeting is absolute garbage. She could have stood there for 2 minutes and then the people wouldn't have followed her, but they followed her because she wasn't answering any questions. Now, her bad day started when the front page of the Sydney Morning Herald and The Age, the Channel 9 newspapers, had a story that showed us that the federal government, that clueless Clare O'Neil and her idiot immigration minister, Andrew Giles, did not want you to know exactly how many people that have been let out as a result of the High Court decision had had serious criminal offences. Now, we know that 7 of them murder or attempted murder. 37 sexual-based offences. 72 had assault, violent offending, kidnapping or armed robbery offences before they were in immigration detention with the plan of staying there until eventually they get booted out of the country. 16 with domestic violence, 13 with drug offending. Less than 5 people, but still, people smuggling. And then there were people with apparently low or no criminality, but 149 is the number of people who this government let out because the High Court made the decision that it did. But the way in which they let them out, the lack of monitoring, the lack of security. Sherry Markson had a story for you just before the start of this hour that there are some 73 that remain unmonitored right now. Now, that information was apparently never to be known. Unless, of course, the person who was asking her questions in Senate estimates asked her the right questions and forced her to give an answer. Now, I read from that story today in the Sydney Morning Herald and The Age. Home Affairs Minister Clare O'Neil and Immigration Minister Andrew Giles hope to keep the document from public scrutiny, according to seven government sources who spoke to this masthead on background. Planning instead was for the recently appointed Home Affairs Secretary, a Stephanie Foster, to give verbal answers to James Patterson, who was the one asking the questions. So the only way we would have got a list of 149 is if James Patterson says, OK, how many have got murder or attempted murder? 7. So how many have got sexually based offending, including child sex offending? 37. Only if he asked the right question would this information have come out. Instead, what happened was that the boss of Home Affairs decided to release the numbers as a document to the Senate inquiry, which meant we got the data without the question specifically being asked and prized out of her. The plan was for you not to know. The plan was that unless they were asked the question that unlocked the information would be kept secret. Now, this is very important because while she was at that estimates hearing, there was some bubbling and blowing up that was happening behind the scenes. Now, again, rather than tabling the written answers earlier in the day, Foster was expected by the ministers to only give verbal answers during the outcome 3, i.e. the conversation about those particular details. Instead, document came out 9:30 in the morning. Unbelievably, despite the fact that she has been caught red-handed trying to hide this information from you and coming up with a tactic of you'll have the information with you but don't say anything unless you're asked, clueless Clare O'Neil carried on with this crap this morning.
The government's really committed to transparency. The information was requested of government. Government provided the information public, so I'm not actually really sure where this story's come from.
Now, this story has come from 7 people inside the government who told us what the plan was. And after the public servant decided to put the piece of paper into the public record rather than to wait and answer the questions cleverly being asked of her, we got reporting today about what happened. Now, the reporting is from our own Olivia Casely here at Sky News, which was, after the Senate hearing took place, the bureaucrat who gave us the information that you have every right to know about the people who are now amongst us because of the decision of the High Court. The management of those people is down to the federal government. Now, they can say, of course, the reason is because of the High Court, but the management of these people is down to these 2 fools. These 2 fools who should have lost their job a long time ago, but because the Prime Minister has got his glass jaw with his fantasies about regular appearances on Sky News, he's trying to keep the Newcastle smell of the government. Well, these 2 stink and obviously they have to go. But apparently what took place, and again, I'll show you the reporting here, was that after the public servant gave you the information you have a right to learn, they're called to a meeting with the Minister and this happened.
I'm told it was an incredibly robust discussion, and sources have confirmed Ms Foster left the office visibly upset after Clare O'Neil, quote-unquote, tore a strip off her. Both Ms O'Neil and Andrew Giles, the Immigration Minister, are said to be furious with Ms Foster following that decision. And I'm also told that Mr Giles didn't speak to Stephanie Foster for nearly a week after this document was made public. The
plan was to keep it secret. The person who decided to tell the Australian people is torn asunder by the minister who was trying to keep it secret and the other minister who tried to play silent treatment. These are the people running the country. The glassjaw fantasist Prime Minister about Sky News conspiracies and media appearances of the opposition leader. And these people who should have come forward with the information, instead they came up with a way to try to hide it. Well, after the video that I showed you at the start of the day was the minister scurrying and answering no questions, a press conference was held in the afternoon once the Liberal Party got together with everyone else in the Senate and said, no, you're not going to bang through legislation in a day. We'll come back to you in May. We'll have a proper investigation. And if it's the right thing to do, then we'll pass the legislation then. But the reporters, they could smell blood in the water.
Excuse me. We're going to run an orderly press conference here. I'll come to Mark and then Paul. Okay, Paul. Excuse me, Paul. Okay. So I'm not going to comment on High Court matters or about legal issues and implications.
And then, just to finish off the day, the ministers who are not required in the parliament to vote because the government's got the numbers. The government doesn't need those two people to be voting because they're in a minority. That's what will happen after the next election if they keep up what they're doing right now. Someone at the back of the room goes, that's it, wrap it up. Minister then turns around and pretends, I can only take one more question. The question is about what I just talked about there and for most of the past few minutes, which was about the meeting with the public servant who released the information the government deliberately came up with a strategy to hide. So, Scarpa, leave, yet the reporters kept following.
Why are you voting for scrutiny? Why has his only contact with an Australian official been easier?
Giving humanitarian visas to people as well. Is that to defeat court cases?
If you won't comment on his individual case, what humanitarian obligation does the government have to children and women stuck in camps in Syria?
Clare O'Neil is clueless. All the people in the media tell you she's a great performer. We've just seen how she performs. The Immigration Minister is not up to the job, and you have seen that working together, they did not want you to know the types of crimes people had committed, that the High Court had let out of permanent detention, and this government, in some cases, released without a visa. There's a lot to get to tonight. Stephen Conroy and Bronwyn Bishop, round 2. It starts next. Thank you very much. They were great last week. They'll be great this week. Plenty to fire up about, but not too much to laugh about tonight. We will do our best to try to fit one in. Stephen Conroy is, of course, the former Labor man, who's always just here to help. He's just here to help. He agreed with every word I just had to say when it came to his mate, clueless Clare O'Neil. Bronwyn Bishop certainly agreed with much of what I just had to say. Of course, carryover champ as always. So, Bronwyn, I'll start with you. Now, there's multiple parts to all of this. Obviously, the Liberals made the decision today that if you give us a piece of legislation and give us only 36 hours to work out whether it's the right thing to do or not, we don't want to do it. So they've held it off for a little while. It was amusing watching Labor people turn around and pretend there's some sort of relationship between the Libs and the Greens. It's just about a decision to say, no, you're not going to shove it down our throat. Because this has been a tactic of the government multiple times, which is they basically walk in with fait accompli, shove it down their throats. Now, you can do that when you have the numbers, that's fine. But obviously, if the Greens aren't in play, as they aren't on this issue, your opposition's able to make something of it. But what did you think of the spectacle today? Because the spectacle was a disgrace, let alone the information that was all there to be revealed to the public, but only if you ask the right question.
That part of it was honestly the most shocking part of it, because that's a conspiracy to deny the Parliament the information. And there's nothing short of that. You can laugh if you like, Stephen, but it's true. And then to have
you have actually been at the table.
Then to call in the secretary and have her leaving in tears. She should go and consult the IR laws of her compatriot, the Minister for Unions, Mr Burke. Well, that behaviour is just not on.
So even if the suggestion is, and again, I was watching the 7:30 report tonight, and the questioning was all about James Patterson. Do you know this incident took place? Well, of course, the reporting. We stand by the reporting that was done by our Canberra team. This is the same reporter that, remember, was yelled and abused at by Mark Dreyfus. So they're going to try and work her over again, but we stand by her and our Canberra team. But Stephen, again here, I get every reason why Clare O'Neil would have the Harry hits at what she believes is a solution to a problem and the Libs delaying. But they're not answering questions while you're walking through the corridor. The avoiding and the avoiding, and then what the Herald and the Age, those far right-wing newspapers, came up with today was, yeah, we had the information about what these people had done. You just had to ask the right question to get it. She ends up revealing it and then gets called into a minister's office and gets her arms torn off.
So, look, you asked about 4 or 5 different questions there, Paul, so apologies. I may have to try and deal with them individually. So let's just start with the fundamental, most important issue here, which is the legislation wasn't passed. So I just want to deal with, I think it was Bronwyn or yourself who said, "I'll ram it down their throats." I was in Parliament the day John Howard called Kim Beazley and said, at 6 o'clock, and said, "Come round to my office," handed him a piece of legislation. It was the Tampa Bill, as it became known, and said, "We're moving this in Parliament at 7 o'clock. We expect your support. We want it passed through the Parliament by the end of the day."
Wrong then, wrong now.
I remember this because I spoke at 2:30 in the morning on the floor of the Senate on the very bill. So can we please not have Bronwyn's hypocrisy?
Yes, I'm sorry.
That this is an outrageous shoving. Or was it Paul?
That is not a fair analogy. That is not a fair analogy. The fact of the matter was,
I'm sorry, there was a hearing
last night. There was a hearing last night where the department said this is not urgent and it does not relate to the High Court decision that is impending. So it's not a fair comparison. And indeed, the Tampa
I'm sorry, Bronwyn,
was something in real time.
There was nothing urgent about the Tampa
bill.
Yes,
it was. It was in real time.
Any more than this. So let's just be clear. The hypocrisy of this argument.
I won't wear that,
if you've been around long enough, it's completely exposed.
So then, Stephen, what about the tactic of the information and the fact that it's the public servant who put it out there? The plan from the politicians, though, was to keep it hidden.
The Senate committee process has a very simple basis. You ask questions, you get answers. Both sides of politics have an absolute. Oh, please, Bronwyn, please, just don't. Do not have amnesia.
I was in the Senate before I went to the. I was in the Senate before I went to the House.
I know you were, which is why you know exactly.
And I knew damn well how to ask questions.
It works.
But in order to get that information,
and so did I. And you absolutely knew.
Paul is quite right at the point he made.
You absolutely knew that if you didn't ask the right question, you wouldn't get the information. You had to be absolutely precise.
But
if you
this is information that the nation is entitled to know. And it was there for
every single question asked by a senator, every single question asked by a senator, and all of those Senate committees that you went to, and 20 years' worth that I went to, all of them were questions that deserved answers that the community wanted to know.
Okay, so what about the public servant?
Any government of any description, both sides is the point I'm making. You answer the question you're asked.
No,
okay, but we have an example here.
Paul made the right point.
Yes, exactly.
Okay, but again, right,
just stop pretending you didn't do it.
Okay, but Stephen, you know that there would be Four Corners investigation, Canberra Columbo's everywhere into who said what if it was the Liberal minister with the public servant, okay? So there is a principle at the heart here, right? And I get it. Sometimes the public servant might go in the direction you don't want them to go as a minister, but is it acceptable what the report seems to suggest today, summons to the office, ignored by one of the ministers for a week, and, well, I don't know what volume it was at, but you can assume it wasn't a whisper, what the conversation was with the lady who wanted to keep the information off the table with the lady who put it on the table.
I've known Clare O'Neil a very long time, and I've been in lots of tense situations with her. I've been in lots of friendly situations with her, but I've known her a long time.
Okay.
I've never heard Clare O'Neil shout in my life.
But she's never been under the pump like this before, Stephen.
Inside, I've known her in every setting, in every environment over the last 20-odd years.
This is much more serious
She
than
wasn't
that.
under the pump. If allegedly, and I apologise, I didn't quite catch because Brom keeps talking in my ear while I'm trying to listen to Paul. I think he said she was called in later. So this isn't in the heat of the moment, sitting there and it happens and it's dragged off into the office instantaneously. That doesn't seem to be the case. So when Bronwyn goes, under the pump like this, a discussion in the office. Now, let me again repeat, I have never heard Clare O'Neil shout in my life. So...
OK, well, so you're going to stand by your experience. I'll stand by our team. I'm not going to fight about it, but I'm just saying that's where we're coming from here.
I am not denying that your team is accurately reporting what it's been told.
Right.
I'm simply giving my experience where I've never seen Clare O'Neil shout, scream, or any of the suggestions. A robust discussion, absolutely. Clare can give as good as she gets.
Yes. Yes. All right. Well, it seems like that has happened. Now, interestingly, they're both going to pop up back in front of all of the senators and be sitting together. Whether they can put it all back in the horse by then, we'll all work out in the meantime. Now, let's get to a couple of other quick things, including I do want to quickly touch on some polling around about Trump and Biden, because there's a little bit of, not quite misinformation, but just misunderstanding about what the headline is there. Matt Common, boss of the Commonwealth Bank, has come out and suggested that a great change to the country should be a massive drop in income tax, an increase in the GST. Do you think that there would be any appetite in Australia for that to happen, Bronwyn?
Well, let me say, first up, he's the first businessman I've heard in a long time who's come out and actually said what he means by the need for tax reform.
Yes.
Most people come out and say, oh, we need very serious tax reform, and never say what it is. Do I believe there's an appetite to change the GST? No, I don't. And I don't for a number of reasons. One is, of course, that the money goes to the states, and the Commonwealth won't be prepared to go through the pain where it doesn't get the money and it loses income tax. There are lots of things you can look at. It's been offered to the states that they could impose their own income tax. It's been offered to you could look at the question of the capital gains tax, which I've said should be reformed, dropped and replaced with a speculative gains tax, which would phase out over a period of years, which could do quite a lot about reducing the price of housing. There are a myriad number of things, but to have a businessman actually come out with some concrete proposals, I think is a good thing, because it does start a proper debate, not this stuff, we've got to have tough tax reform, without ever saying what it is.
Stephen, I want to get onto this this polling, but give me your thoughts on what the Commonwealth Bank boss had to say.
No. So, Paul, hold on to your seat. I'm going to agree with Bronwyn on one part of what she said. Whoa. At least he was honest what he means.
Yeah, correct.
Greed is good. And it's just good to see one of our senior leading businessmen tell the truth. He believes in the greed in goods is philosophy. Because in a cost of living crisis, anyone who wants to argue, let's put up the price of supermarket goods, you know, you got to say, greed is good. Fantastic. Congratulations. I look forward to him going on any of your shows, going anywhere in the country, do a tour, get out of your boardroom, stop talking to a few Fin Review journalists, go and face a few of your own banking customers and tell them that's what you think. His PR people must have been going, oh, my God, what has he done?
The second least anxious after Clare O'Neil's people. But anyway, yeah.
I was on the front line selling the GST, not for the Howard government one, but the one before that as well.
Correct.
I was on the road for something like 5 years.
Yep.
All right. Now, just quickly, I've got 2 minutes left here. We've got Megyn Kelly. We're going to have some fun with her in a second, all right? Headlines came out today suggesting new poll says Biden's getting closer. And that's kind of true in a couple of the swing states, but it's not true once you actually look into the polls. Now, as you know, the election's not all about 50 states. Of course, Biden will end up winning the popular vote because of places like California and New York. But the states that end up mattering are Arizona, Georgia, Michigan, Nevada, North Carolina, Pennsylvania and Wisconsin. Now, in a two-horse race, Trump leads by 5 in Arizona, 7 in Georgia, 6 in North Carolina, 2 in Nevada. Biden leads by 1 in Wisconsin, and it's a tie in Michigan and Pennsylvania. But of course, it ain't just two people running. As we know, Bobby Kennedy Jr. is out there, named one of his donors as his vice presidential candidate. And if you have a look at Arizona, it's Trump 43, Biden 37, Kennedy 12, and a couple of others that are there. When you look at Georgia, it's 45, 38 and 7. See, once you start to have a look at these states with more than 2 candidates on the ballot, Biden's number falls, Trump's number holds. I've got a very short period of time. Bronwyn, your thoughts on what I've just said?
I just want to make this point, that the Guardian wrote an article, Biden bump is real. President gains on Trump in 6 battleground states.
A friend sent me that
But
today.
right down the bottom of the article, it says, this article was amended on the 26th of March 2024. An earlier version of the subheading said that Joe Biden led Trump in Wisconsin, Arizona, Georgia, Nevada and North Carolina. This should just have said Wisconsin. In other words, the whole article was a load of rubbish. No, and furthermore, if I look...
we're going to wind up, Paul. We've got to wind up.
If I looked at the other states, Arizona, North Carolina, Michigan, Pennsylvania, all have very high Muslim populations, which is why Biden is changing his tune on Israel.
That is absolutely true. All right, your reaction to all of it?
This is the Democrats' worst nightmare, that Kennedy could cost Biden the election. And those figures bear that out. Kennedy is a bigger threat to Biden than Trump. And I think those figures absolutely demonstrate that you just highlighted, Paul.
Yeah, and also it's that thing. Anyone talking about American politics, if they don't mention that there's multiple people in the election, there's various moments when multiple people qualify or don't qualify, but it's not about Trump v Biden. Ignore those polls. Get into the states, get into the minutiae, and we will do that all the time. Thank you, guys. Do appreciate it. All right, Gore Bush. I don't know what he was going to say. He tried to have the last one, but alas, the microphone fell away. Thank you, guys. Megyn Kelly next. Fired up and a lot of fun with her in a moment's time.
Time of the week for our favourite person in the world, none other than the wonderful Megyn Kelly, who always just looks full of energy, but she's bouncing her off the walls because she's just back from a beautiful vacay, a bit of spring break. How'd you go?
Yes, we had a wonderful time. Got to spend 2 full weeks with the fam. And my 12-year-old daughter, she taught me something that I think your audience might appreciate. She loves Australia, and she loves shows about Australians. And she told me I could impress you and sound like a legit Australian if I just said, I'm saying 3 words that are not the words you're going to hear. If I said the following: how does a man shave? With rise up lights. Rise up lights.
Yeah, that's good.
I'm saying rise up lights. But, I see with the Australian accent, it sounds like rise up lights.
Razor blades, good on you, Dale. You can come round any time and do whatever the heck you want. This joint's yours, an honorary Australian. How good's Megyn?
I love my new party trick.
Yeah. Well, you're welcome here any time. And speaking of razors, in a second, we're going to get to the bloke who was shaving in the women's locker room at a gym. But first, let's just bounce around some of the politics here. The former boss of the Republican Party, Mitt Romney's niece, I think, but she had to pretend that she wasn't because Donald Trump didn't like Mitt Romney. But still, she ends up on a deal, a few $100,000 to become a talking head on your old joint, NBC. And the inmates didn't like it. And the inmates have been rattling, and she'll end up getting sacked less than a week after starting a new job.
Yep. The news broke later today. She's fired before she was basically hired. And why? Absolutely nothing changed other than the inmates got upset. They got really upset. They got indignant that someone who is an election denier would share the company badge of an NBC News staffer. They literally said that. I wrote down a badge-carrying member of NBC, our sacred airwaves. Sacred? They went on. NBC News's credibility is now shared with this person, an election denier. Rachel Maddow, I mean, she gave a performance that was Meryl Streep worthy. It is something to behold. I couldn't take my eyes off of it, just as a matter of like performance and theater. And God, does she need a little makeup? But that's an aside. Will the judges have the fortitude to do what's right? Will they? With the dramatic looks up to the ceiling. Oh my God, could you please? It was a lot. And I don't really know whether it's acting or if she's genuinely that torqued up about the possibility of another Trump win. That could be it as well. But what they're saying is this woman cannot be an NBC Newser, even a contributor, because she denied elections. But as it turns out, that's perfectly fine to do as long as the election you are denying is one in which a Republican one. That's the magical trick, you see. Those people, like Hillary Rodham Clinton, who denied the 2016 election was legit, and Stacey Abrams, a Democrat who lost in Georgia for governor, who's denied it ever since because she lost to a Republican. She's been all over MSNBC. Both of them have been all over MSNBC. And all the Dems who also denied those elections, like Trump's in 2016, have been all over MSNBC. So it's fine, as it turns out, to share the badge or appear on their sacred air, as long as you're not denying that a Democrat won the race.
Let's talk about what's been happening in and around the Royals, because Megyn, of course, is now trying to reinvent herself as a version of Gwyneth Paltrow. I certainly hope that we don't get the scented candle. That's one for Google, everyone. You got to Google it. We're not filling the daily. Go and Google it. Complain to somebody else.
It smells like Rio. Sound. You know what I'm saying? Okay, so
we're in so much trouble. I don't care, but it's great. I don't care.
So after everything, think about it. After everything, she had a website called The TIG, which was like a lifestyle thing. Then she gets a job on Suits. She becomes an actress. She gets noticed by Prince Harry. She lands the gorilla. She marries him. She wrests him away from his family. Megxit is a success, at least as far as they're concerned. She gets $100 million from Netflix. She gets $50 million from Spotify. She's on the cover of magazines. This is great. You know, fine. They took some bad publicity, but she's still a star and she's much better off. And what is it all for? To return to being a lifestyle blogger. She's a lifestyle blogger. That's exactly what she is now. She's got like some, I don't remember the name. It's got like 40 words in it of her new blog, but it's basically I'm amazing and you're not, Montecito. And it shows her baking. She's baking. Okay. Then she's in a ball gown. And again, I look at her and I ask myself, okay, I'm totally open-minded to why I should admire you. You lay it on me. Come on, I'm ready for it. And I have yet to hear anything. You bake? Is that what it is? Because I don't believe that. You wear a ball gown? Okay, I guess that's true, but it's pretty much with somebody else's money and somebody else's styling. You stood up for women. How again? Oh, when you were like 10, you didn't like a commercial and you said something about it? That was like 35 years ago, and I'm supposed to be rooting. I don't get it. And I don't think other people are going to be attracted to her brand at all because it's fake. She earned nothing. She knows how to do nothing. And she stands for nothing other than one thing, Meghan Markle.
This has been one of my favourites. Thank you so much for the chat. Can you go on holidays every couple of weeks and come back this fired up? I love it. I love it. I love it.
You know, I'm going to be in this cartoon that's coming out, and like I'm taking on my first acting role, Paul, and I think it's really helping me. I think it really helped me today. I
think that you are expressing yourself beautifully, rounding your vowels and speaking to the back of the theatre. There, darling.
Rise up lights.
Now, a tradition, and if you keep a very eagle eye around this set, is that when Zadie, my youngest, goes to the Easter hat parade, I will put the hat of which she has on the set. We have the one from last year. Now, today she had her little Easter hat parade, and I was incredibly proud of her and all of her friends as they were twirling and catwalking and posing and enjoying every little moment of it. And it's always a reminder about how awesome real life is, as opposed to the noise of politics, at times the aggro at telly, but that little girl is going to absolutely change the universe, as will her older sister, whom yesterday I gave the dictionary to. Now, the dictionary was the same dictionary that I had stolen from my public school 4 years ago, and I told her where the swear words are. So, great parent, here's a late debate.